What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 4 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop here with the quarterback preview for week number 4 to kick things off. 3 games on the schedule this week. The Thursday night game between the Edmonton Elks and Toronto Argonauts has been postponed due to a COVID situation with the Elks organization. So only 3 games to pick from, only 6 starting quarterbacks. You got to take one of them, unless you're daring enough to go without. So not a whole lot of options available. We've got the Hamilton Tiger Cats taking on the Montreal Alouettes on Friday, the BC Lions and Ottawa Red Blacks on Saturday, and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Calgary Stampeders on Sunday. So what are we looking at for options at quarterback? Well, you've got Vernon Adams Jr. out in Montreal, Zach Collaros out in Winnipeg, Jeremiah Mazzoli, presumably for the Ticats, unless they decide to go with Dane Evans coming out of the bye. We don't know at this point, but I would assume it's Mazzoli. Michael Riley for the BC Lions, Matt Nichols for the Ottawa Red Blacks, and after making his first start last week and putting up a 300-yard game and getting the win, Jake Mayer presumably getting the second straight start for the Calgary Stampeders. Now, of these options, there's 3 I really like. There's 2 I'm cautious on, and there's 1 I'm just staying away. Starting with the ones I like, let's start positive. It's the guys you find pretty much at the top of the price charts, and they're up there for a reason because they've been producing so far this year. Number 1 quarterback so far has been Cody Fajardo of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He's on a bye week this week, so that's not an option. But the next best option available so far this season has been Vernon Adams Jr. of the Montreal Alouettes. He's only played 2 games. They had a bye in week 1, but in those 2 games, he's averaged 21.1 fantasy points. Pretty solid start to the year. He's a guy that likes to use his legs. Put up over 60 rushing yards, which is 6 points there alone in week number 3 against Calgary. So he's a guy that's going to get you points in the passing game. He's going to get you points in the running game. And, he put up a solid performance in week number 3 with 22.9 points against Calgary. But that wasn't even his best day. He completed less than 50% of his passes. There were a lot of drop balls by the receivers. He got close to getting another touchdown in the end zone right at the game there. They got down to the 1-yard line. Just imagine what Vernon Adams Jr.'s point total would have been had they converted that and made some of those plays. So I am high on Vernon Adams Jr. I like the matchup this week as well with Hamilton. So far in the 2 games they've played, Hamilton's, they've given up 19 points to Zach Collaros in week 1, 25.5 points to Cody Fajardo in week number 2. So an average of over 22 points against for this Ticats defense so far. I'm expecting Hamilton's offense to be a bit better coming out of the bye week, which maybe, takes less pressure off the defense, which tips things back in the other direction. But I really like Adams Jr. against this Ticats defense, and I think we're going to see a higher completion percentage this week, more yards, and maybe a couple extra touchdowns. So he's, to me, the number 1 fantasy option if you can afford him at an $11,282 salary, the highest option at quarterback this week. The second one I like is Zach Collaros in Winnipeg, $10,757. He saved about $500 over Vernon Adams Jr. In 3 games so far this year, averaging 17.2 points. He's not going to put you up a ton of yards. He's yet to break 300. He came close in week 2. But he's putting up the touchdowns each and every week, which is the big thing here. I believe, a couple touchdowns in week 1, I think 2 touchdowns in each game so far this season. Even in that week 3 matchup where things just did not go right for them against Toronto, those 2 touchdowns helped him put up 14.6 points. So that's huge. That's going to, make a difference right there. If your quarterback, even if he's not getting the yards, he can still put up the points by getting the TDs on the board. And he faces the Calgary defense that's given up the most against quarterbacks so far fantasy-wise this season. In 3 games, they've averaged 22.6 points against. And the lowest performance they've given up is 20.3. So if the floor is 20 points for your quarterback against Calgary, and Zach Collaros knowing his ability to put the ball in the end zone, I like that option in week number 4 against that Stampeders defense for a Bombers offense that I expect to bounce back nicely after they had their fair share of struggles and really didn't get the ball moving at all outside a couple big plays against Toronto in week number 3. The other option I really like is Michael Riley out in BC. In 3 games, he's averaged 15 points. That's scaled a little bit because he only played a half or even less than that against Saskatchewan. You take that first half out of it, you're looking at 17, 18 points a game for Riley over a 2.5 game span. $9,117, so he's cheaper than the other two. Saves you a bit of cash there. A bit of a down week for him as well, much like Collaros in week number 3. I thought I was expecting bigger things. He puts up just 12.5 points in that game against Edmonton. Really could not get the ball moving offensively at all, which was a bit surprising. But I like him on the bounce back this week because I like the matchup with Ottawa. Week 1, they shut Trevor Harris down very well. They wouldn't let him get in the end zone. I believe they held Saskatchewan, to 1 offensive touchdown in week number 3. So Ottawa hasn't been giving up a whole lot of touchdowns so far this year, but they're giving up a lot of yardage. Despite not putting points on the board, Harris threw for over 300 in week number 1 against them. Fajardo had a great week in week number 3 against them as well. So averaging 16.3 points against per game, which puts them at the 3rd highest, the defense there in Ottawa. So I think there's room for Riley, who's a guy who can definitely put up the passing yards for you, to put those up against this Ottawa defense, especially if Ottawa's offense is going to continue to struggle as it has been. You're going to see Riley out there on the field quite a bit this game. You're going to see them passing the ball. They love to throw the ball. They have a great slew of receivers there. I just can't see Brian Burnham being held to, around 30 yards for a second straight week. I can't see Lucky Whitehead being held to just 30 yards with the role he's played there in that offense for BC. So expecting bounce-back games from them, which should be bounce-back games for Michael Riley as well. So he's the 3rd option I like at quarterback. I do like Collaros and Adams a little bit more, but I think Riley is a very viable option if you need to save a little bit of money there. The two options I'm a bit hesitant on this week, or cautious, thinking that they could produce for you, but I'm not sure I'm definitely going that way. Jeremiah Mazzoli in Hamilton comes in at $10,398. When we last saw him play in 2019, he was playing MOP level football. He's struggled so far this season. Just an average of 9.9 points in 2 games, less than 10. That's not what you want to see, especially from a quarterback that costs you so much in CFL Fantasy. I think he's struggled partially due to missing some of his big-name receivers. No Braylon Addison, no Devere Posey has certainly, hurt him in that regard. But they've also struggled on the offensive line in those 2 games, I found, and haven't given him enough time back there to throw the ball. So I think he's struggled in that regard, but you have to look at the defenses he's faced. He's faced Winnipeg's defense, he's faced Saskatchewan's defense, arguably 2 of the best defenses in the league so far this season. So those 2 teams combined have given up an average of 13.3 and 12.8 points against only so far this season. So maybe he gets a bit of a bounce back game. Maybe the bye week helps them get a little more healthy this week, and Mazzoli returns to the level of play we know he's capable of. He faces a Montreal team that's given up an average of 13.5 through 2 games this season. So that's around the same range that Winnipeg and Saskatchewan have. And Montreal can certainly shut a quarterback down. But I like the potential for Mazzoli to get back on track here. I can't see Hamilton's offense being as inept as they were for a third straight game. There's too much talent there, especially if they get some of those pieces back. So I'm cautious on Mazzoli just because we haven't seen him produce so far this season, but we know what he's capable of, and I would not be surprised to see a bounce back week from him in week 4. And the other cautiously optimistic is Jake Maier, $5,000 for the Calgary Stampeders. Just one start on the season last week against Montreal, puts up 12.7 points, 300-yard game, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions that he threw early in that game before he started getting in his groove. He's a tempting pick. If he can replicate such a performance for $5,000, that gives you so much lineup flexibility elsewhere. The thing I don't like is he's facing a Bombers defense that has only given up 13.3 points per game this season. Even last week, Toronto seemed to have their way with the Bombers defense, but and then Nick Arbuckle put up 23 points against them. But there's even then, I think they still shut things down decently well. I'm not sold on Maier after just one start. I think it's going to be a bounce back game. The Bombers are always better at home. That defense is going to bounce back. That offense for Winnipeg is going to be much better, I think, this week, which is going to mean the defense is out on the field less, which means they're less tired, which means I think they'll do a better job of defending against Calgary's offense. So I'm not sold on Maier enough to take the chance at $5,000 myself in week 4, unless there's guys I really want to fit in my lineup elsewhere that I just need the cash, and then I'm hoping for a decent, maybe a 10-point performance out of Maier. But he's facing a Bombers defense that loves turnovers and forces a couple a game. That's going to hurt your stats there, and if they can get it back on track on the coverage downfield, that's going to spell not a fantastic day for Maier, much like it did for the quarterbacks against them in weeks 1 and 2. So promising first start for the kid. I want to see him put up a second one before I'm moving him into a guaranteed territory myself. And finally, the one option to stay away from, unless you really want to take a risk in week 4 and just really have that gut feeling, stay away from Matt Nichols. Ottawa's quarterback, $6,441, second cheapest starting option over Maier. In 2 games he's played this year, he's averaged just 4.3 fantasy points. That is a dismal number to get from your quarterback if that's the average that you're getting from them. It's frankly a stay away option until we see otherwise. And for Nichols, he's never been a yardage guy. In his time in Winnipeg, he hardly ever threw 300-yard games. It was always the touchdowns that he was throwing here that made him, a potential fantasy option. Well, he's not getting those on the board out in Ottawa right now. They're not putting the production up. The offensive line is not helping keep him upright with all the pieces they're missing there, and I just don't think they have the full talent yet at wide receiver to make Nichols a strong fantasy threat until we're proven otherwise. And he faces a tough matchup this week. He faces the BC Lions, who have given up just an average of 12 points to quarterbacks so far this season. So the Lions have been, and they faced, some top tier quarterbacks in Cody Fajardo and Bo Levi Mitchell. Granted, he had a broken fibula, and Trevor Harris. So those are 3 big name quarterbacks, 3 of the top ones in the league that they've shut down fairly well so far this season. So I'm staying away from this matchup. There's no chance, personally, I am putting Matt Nichols in my lineup against BC because I expect much of the same from the Lions defense, and I expect much of the same from Ottawa's offense just not getting things going. So those are your quarterback options for week number 4. I like Vernon Adams Jr., Zach Collaros, Michael Riley. Cautiously optimistic on Jeremiah Mazzoli and Jake Maier, and staying away from Matt Nichols. Stay tuned later today. I'll have your running back preview out later today as well. We'll look at all the options at running back this week. Another interesting position to talk about with only 6 games and some of the top running backs out of question for this week. So we'll look at that later today, and then stay tuned tomorrow for your wide receiver and defense previews as well. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you liked, what you didn't. And if you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comments or tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42 as well. As always, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for running back preview later today, and have a good one. Bye.